Mike Dixon here with a quick update ahead of today's podcast with Tom Press. When we recorded, Tom was at Microsoft, but is now the sales director of Key Pharmaceuticals. The world moves quickly, as will Key Pharma, with Tom joining an awesome team led by CEO Millian Ho, CFO Byron Bassett, and previous podcast guest, Marketing Director Nick Boyden. Enjoy Tom's podcast, everybody.
Welcome to Your Future in Sales and Marketing, a podcast that helps you make great career decisions to get the most out of your career journey. We'll introduce you to the AXR network of established senior leaders and a hand-picked group of future aspiring leaders who have it all in front of them. You'll learn what it's like in the top job and how to get there. Your hosts from AXR's specialist sales and marketing recruitment team will also land bonus episodes for you on how to work with recruiters, write a resume, and smash an interview, as well as our very popular market updates. It's the podcast that has it all. You can't get this career advice anywhere else.
Welcome everyone to Your Future in Sales and Marketing. My name is Mike Dixon, Director of the AXR Sales and Marketing Practice. Today we're joined in the pod by Tom Press, an FMCG leader who spent the last 4 years working as a sales director in Microsoft. Welcome, Tom. How are you?
Thank you, Mike. I'm very well, thank you.
Well, it's great to have you in, Tom. I've been looking forward to this one. We've been talking about this for a wee while, so let's get into it. I know that you've heard a few of the pods before, so you know the format, but we'll start with your favorite brand. And you've, as the listeners will uncover, you've worked for a few, so you've got to pick one that you haven't worked on.
Okay. I've been thinking about this one, Mike, and expecting this question to come up. Unsurprisingly, it'll be rugby related, which I think you'd anticipate. But I think for the guys that know me, the people out there that know me, they'll be surprised with my choice. I'm actually going to go my favourite brand at the moment, the Springboks.
Right. Go on.
Bit of a backstory to that one. I think what I love about the Springboks, steeped in history, they've got all of that. But probably for the last 20 years, or certainly, since 95, been renowned for boring rugby. Big forward pack, a number 10 that can boot the leather off the ball, and, fantastic wingers that'll never see the ball. So, they've been steeped in and on that one. And then sort of more recently, last sort of 8-10 years, they've built that reputation as, they're great in a World Cup year, but outside of World Cup years, they don't perform. They don't do too well and, too traditional, etc. But then watching them sort of start 3 or 4 years ago, but over the last 2 years, still steeped in their roots and tradition, big forward packs, fantastically skillful fly halves who can boot the leather off the ball. But they've kind of taken that basis and just evolved and completely transformed their brand, how they operate and how they go about it. They've got the bomb squad, they've got the leckerbacks, they've got these, phenomenal, fierce centre combinations. And they've got this mad scientist sort of driving, through Rassie Erasmus, driving and guiding them how they play rugby. And I think they've completely transformed the way that people think about rugby, or rugby people and rugby teams think about it. The bomb squad, a 7-man forward pack. They're just really challenging conventions, bringing genuine innovation through to how they play and playing it their own way, built off their strength. So from a tired, traditional brand to a brand that's driving innovation, still built on their foundations, I'm going with the Springboks.
Yeah. Do you know, we can make this a podcast about rugby, Tom, easily, because I have fallen in love with the Springboks as well for almost exactly the reasons you talked about. I used to find them just the dullest dishwater team. It's like watching England. Yeah. And just, all the potential, none of the execution, none of the ambition. Yeah. Whereas the Springboks create with innovation, create innovation within a pattern, and they do it in such a unique way. I love watching them. I'd hate to play against them.
No, definitely not. But and then what they stand for as well, I think, Sia Khaleesi, and I think it's not, they're not playing for their rugby team, they're playing for their country. And watching the documentaries, a huge sense of purpose.
That Rainbow Nation,
bigger than them.
It's absolutely extraordinary. So great, good choice. I'm with you. I could easily go into this one. We'll say I agree, and we'll get on to the next question.
Fair enough. Move on.
So where are you from? So give me a bit about your background. life before we jump into your career, Tom?
Sure. So Sydney born and raised, I was very fortunate to grow up on the northern beaches, just living off of Longreef Golf Club, which was brilliant. So, summers on the beach, riding skateboards, riding bikes up around, 3 brothers, sort of 2 older brothers keeping me in line and a little brother putting up with me. But had a fantastic childhood. Parents are absolutely brilliant. School on northern beaches as well, so really tight-knit group of mates as well. There's a core group of 10 of us. We still catch up and go away every year as well. So fantastic childhood on the northern beaches. Went to uni, Sydney Uni as well. So again, didn't quite move out of home too early, sponging off mum and dad for a little while longer while I was seeing my way through uni. And then kicked off into work life, which we'll touch on, and sort of fast forward to where I am now. Married 3 lunatic children, 3 gorgeous kids, Sophie, Millie and Ollie, and my wife Suze. So we're just now on the lower north shore of Sydney.
Great. Haven't moved too far from the roots then.
Not too far.
Well, I'm Northern Beaches. I completely understand why you love it so much for all those reasons. Great. So you picked this FMCG career, Unilever specifically. Just talk about the start. How did you get into it and why? So this is where I'd love to be able to tell you a very predefined, this is what I was chasing and for these reasons. But Mike, it was none of that. I just graduated Bachelor of Commerce degree, majoring in marketing economics from Sydney Uni, and I just needed a job. This was back in the days where I'd sort of get the newspaper out. I saw this job for Lever Rexona. I'd never heard of Lever Brothers. Back then it wasn't Unilever, it was Lever Brothers and Uni Foods. Hadn't heard of either of those, but, I recognised Rexona, loosely associated to sport. So I was like, okay, I'll give that a crack. So I sort of stumbled my way as a sales control assistant into Unilever. And looking back, I could not have had or wished for or planned an even better start to a career than what I was fortunate enough to come across by chance. I was very, very quickly welcomed, supported, pushed and developed. It was just a fantastic opportunity and time to join what turned out to be a big organisation, and I loved every minute of it. Great. Fantastic training ground for anybody if you can get into a tier 1 to begin with. The kind of development patterns, the seeing what great looks like is amazing.
Yeah, and I was really so absolutely, the processes and the structures and the thought behind everything was incredible. But I think at that moment, the willingness of all of the team around to put their arm around everybody else and say, actually, I can teach you something. I can, hand something off some of my knowledge to you that'll make you better off. And so I was just surrounded by an incredible bunch of very giving leaders that really just helped me from a very early on to sort of craft and sort of figure out what it is I needed to do and eventually get pretty good at doing it. And so, I've got a lot to owe to, a lot of those leaders that had an impact on me from a very early on career.
Well, we have a few shout-outs as we go through the pod, Tom. But
sure.
Like a lot of Aussies, we live in a beautiful part of the world, but it's a long way from anywhere. And you'd Northern Beaches, Sydney Uni, at Unilever, but had a hankering. I've got to spend time overseas at some point. And you had the UK as your lead pick. And Unilever could have been a great pathway there, but it didn't quite turn out the way you expected it to, did it?
Not quite. I think so firstly, I always wanted to live and work overseas. So, finished school straight into uni straight into work. So I didn't get that sort of that travel experience there. And Australia being quite a developed market in the FMCG world, I thought, well, where else can I grow and expand my learning elsewhere? Working for an Anglo-Dutch company, okay, I'll go for the UK. So very early on through all my career discussions, with my bosses and my leaders, it's oh, and once I reach a certain point, I'd love to be sent overseas to learn X, Y, and Z to bring back to the ANZ market. And the feedback was, well, anything's possible, but you got to work your butt off. So I worked my butt off and head down and push, work, and, got promoted along the way and sort of had some really good experiences to sort of get into that. And then one day I got asked a question that I wasn't expecting. Hey, Tom, what do you think about Vietnam? So I was like, well, I don't think, what do you mean? It's like, well, there's a role over there, 2-year contract. If you're interested, is it something you'd be interested in? And I was like, well, yes, absolutely. But do you mind if I sort of go back and talk to my then fiancée, Suze, about the idea? So went home, had a chat to Suze, and I knew the incumbent who was there as well, and, asked him, what do you think? And he goes, it is brilliant. It is fantastic. For personal reasons, he had to come home, but he goes, but I would recommend it in a heartbeat. And he was a guy I sort of trusted, one of my former bosses. Threw my hat in the ring and, ended up in not quite the UK, but in Vietnam as modern trade director, which was crazy.
Amazing job. And a country I've not been to yet, but it's absolutely on my list. My daughter's been, my son's been, wife and I haven't been yet. So very, very keen to go. But what was it like as a younger person living and working there?
It was amazing. It's everything I expected and nothing that I expected at the same time. It was crazy. So I think, Unilever in Vietnam was huge. It was 1% of the GDP.
Wow.
Absolutely massive. And so, had this huge success, but it was sort of transitioning from, what was general trade. So, the sachets hanging from a little mum and pop store. That was the business, and that's what it was built on. That was 80% contribution when I arrived. But supermarkets and, cash and carries and sort of beauty stores, they were starting to accelerate, driven by local suppliers and then accelerated by multinationals, coming in. So Casino, Carrefour, Metro, Family Mart from Japan, they were accelerating that growth.
Yeah, big retailers.
Big retailers, big international retailers. And there was the urbanisation of the population as well, which further accelerated that one. So what was I expecting? Well, I knew coming in, I was told I had to do 3 things. I think number 1, grow and deliver, but do so by building the brands, because it was the brand legacy that we wanted to leave behind. So that was, the first mandate. The second mandate was about, you've got a fantastic team here. We want you to develop one of your team members, so you hand off to her, and she'll take over your role. So develop her so she's in a great position in 2 years' time to become the modern trade director. And I was like, okay, that's absolutely fantastic. And work through the organisation to upskill the understanding of what modern trade was. So things like, brand execution, central control, P&L management, retailer profitability, the idea of category reviews and planogramming, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So help upskill the organisation so they're future-proof and ready to take on modern trade when it becomes a much larger part of the business than what it was. So that was the work front. On the personal front, it was fantastic. 2008 this was. So we'd just married earlier that year, just renovated our house. So Suze and I sort of jumped over there. She put pause on her career to sort of go on this crazy adventure. And funny story, I was flying back and forth for maybe the first 3 months. So, 2 weeks there, 2 weeks back, 2 weeks there, 2 weeks back. So I was sort of kind of getting used to and acclimatized to the craziness of Ho Chi Minh City and the noise and the motorbikes and the beep, beep, beep all the time. And then came back for Christmas, and then, very early January, flew over with Suze. And I just remember being in the taxi from the airport on the way to the hotel we were going to stay at. And I was, how exciting is this? And I was, really upbeat and exciting. And I just turned and I looked at Suze's face, and she was like completely stunned. And I was like, I forgot. Yeah, it's a bit much to
You
go
haven't
on.
seen this before, yeah.
The noise,
Yeah,
the chaos, and even little things like, the silhouette of Stalin and the hammer and sickle. It's like, that's right, we're in a communist country, and it's just growing up in Australia. It's confronting the noise. Vietnam is a beautiful country. It's filled with the most wonderfully curious, genuinely curious people that you could have, and an expat community that really cares about welcoming and supporting others who are sort of coming in there. So we're really fortunate on the personal front. And then on the professional front, it was 1,000 miles an hour, and I learnt so much.
Brilliant. So you could bring all that experience back to Australia, but you didn't quite go straight back to Australia.
No. I was sort of coming up toward the end of the 2 years, and Suze was pregnant. I think she was about 26 weeks pregnant, when I'll share the story. And so I was like, okay, time to come home, and, baby on the way, have the baby back in Sydney. Okay, what's going on for work at home? What's available in Sydney, and planning that one in. And then one day my boss, he was a Dutch guy, Rob pulled me into the office and goes, "Oh, before you fly back to Sydney, have you put any thought, what do you think of Thailand?" It's like, "Well, what do you mean?" And, my boss was talking to who would become my future boss, and they were looking to set up a new department for Unilever Thailand. And so I flew over to Thailand, had a chat to the team there about setting up this new department, channel marketing. So came back home to Susan and said, "Well, what do you think about going to Thailand?" And she was like, "Oh, not sure." Had some friends who had literally just moved from Vietnam to Thailand maybe 3 months before. Touched base with them, and they said, "It is brilliant. You'll love it. Come on over." So instead of flying back to Sydney, Sue's 32 weeks pregnant, we flew into Bangkok, and got ready for me to start a new job and for Suze to give birth to baby Sophie.
In Bangkok?
In Bangkok.
Wow, brilliant. Is it for everybody, you think? Because there'll be listeners thinking, wow, it's incredible. Maybe I should widen my horizons and look at developing markets as opposed to the traditional developed, mature Western markets. But, it's confronting as it was when you first got there. When on reflection, do you think anyone can make it there, or do you need to be a certain type of person?
You do need a degree of resilience. So first and foremost, lifestyle was good. We had lived in some fantastic houses, very, very safe and secure. So, that base layer of the pyramid was well and truly looked after. We were surrounded by and met some great people, great friends who were very, very caring, and we're all kind of in the same situation. So we really lent out to support each other through that, and had the backing of an incredible organisation. And I was fortunate to have some fantastic leaders above me and brilliant teams around me. I felt safe, but there is a degree of resilience. Sometimes, you do get homesick. You miss your family, you miss your friends. You miss being able to just walk down the street and buy a newspaper or drive down to the beach and, go for a swim. So there were moments of homesickness, but then sort of on the balance of everything, I knew it wasn't going to be forever. I knew Sydney was always going to be my home. This was a moment in time, and just enjoy the experience for while we had it. Work hard and enjoy the lifestyle while we were there. So we were prepared for it, Suze and I, and we made the most of it while we were there.
Yeah, and what you're describing there is that expat community that does exist in most countries, with people going through a similar life stage, similar career stage, experiencing the same things, supporting each other. Some people stay in that expat world and just can't ever get off the drug of the lifestyle, potentially.
Yeah.
But you did, and you came back to Australia before then moving to New Zealand, which was your last role with Unilever. Take us through that journey, Tom. So bounced back to Australia for a period, and then into New Zealand to run the business there.
Yeah, sure. So arriving back into Australia, Unilever was navigating some sort of, I'll say, turbulent times. And so new leadership came through and wanted to rejuvenate in some particular areas. So I sort of did some work to help provide a framework and design on what some of those strategic areas could be and what it could look like. And then, again, a funny story, literally the day before taking 2 weeks leave, the chairman at the time, the CEO, he sort of brought me into one of the quiet rooms. I'm thinking, oh, geez, what's this about? He goes, well, Tom, I understand you're going on holidays for 2 weeks. I'm like, yeah, that's right. Looking forward to it. Been a tough 6 months, put my feet up for a while, will be good. He goes, actually, do you mind flying into Auckland instead of Sydney? Would like you to take over running the customer development department for New Zealand. And I thought, brilliant, absolutely brilliant. The two previous leaders were guys that I'd known and respected for a very, very long time. They raved about it. I knew the New Zealand team. I rated them very, very highly. So again, it's like, I love the idea. Need to bounce it off my wife if that's okay. So sort of came home that night.
Who's she just dragging her everywhere?
No, she puts up with a lot from me. No, and we had a second baby. Young Millie was born in Sydney. So hey Suze, what do you think about jumping over to NZ for a little while? And at first she took a bit of arm twisting, but I think jumped over there and absolutely loved it. New Zealand is, I think, from a lifestyle perspective, very similar to Australia, but better in many degrees. And I think from a market perspective is greatly undervalued and underutilized in terms of developing leadership and capability. To me, I see it as a very an integral hothouse where great leaders can develop both, and you just look around at the fantastic Kiwi-based leaders around the world now, very innovative, but also a lot of, I learned so much going through there. And I think sort of that mid-career account exec, especially, or in the category team, can learn so much there.
Yeah, I spent time in New Zealand too, Tom, and I think it gets overlooked by Aussies. In fact, it's amazing how many Aussies haven't ever been to New Zealand, let alone see it as a place to work and learn and have fun and stretch themselves. And try a lot of interesting things. It's a similar but different market, and I think you can get a lot from it. So I wholeheartedly agree with that.
Yeah.
So you were 15 years in total at Unilever before you left the mothership and came back to Sydney and joined Danone, I should say.
Yeah.
What was it like? What was the kind of exit and re-entry like into another business?
Look, I think for me, over the 15 years, and particularly having sort of spent 6 of those years outside of Sydney, it was time for me to look for a new change. Firstly, the faces around the office were different. The people who had brought me up and developed me, they'd all left and moved on. So I actually didn't find it that difficult to move or to decide to leave. And then what I quickly learnt as well is over that 15 years, I'd worked with a lot of people and actually there's lots of Unilever faces, familiar faces that are sort of scattered around the FMCG industry. So, I jumped over to Danone Nutrition, Dennis Phelps, one of my sort of former mentors and a guy I still look up to greatly. He was working for Danone Nutrition. So, all the infant formula and early life nutrition. And they were going through, this was the height of Daigao sort of shelf grazing, exporting into China. Yeah. And, Danone had grown sort of 3-4-fold, over the preceding 2 years and kind of outgrown their ability to structure themselves. So Phelps, he said, actually, Tom, it's probably not the role you want, but I need some help. Would you be interested in providing, running a couple of projects for us to help build up some capability and give us a view as to how we could structure ourselves to make sure that we're building a domestic business, not an export business. So, jumped in and, helped did that. And, for me, I was able to sort of pay back some of the I was able to share the learnings that I had to build up some capability, number one. But what I was also able to take out is it really gave me my first proper exposure through to the pharmacy channel and understanding the intricacies of the pharmacy channel and the differences through to, grocery and independent trade. So I really loved doing that work, and what started off as a 6-month contract turned into a full-time role, where I was sort of leading the sales team there, and absolutely had a ball. And then sort of toward the end of that period, the factory had sort of really cranked up their production. The demand was sort of evening out, so stability was returning. And so I kind of sort of got a bit of an itch where I was like, there's a bit too much familiarity and routine here. I need a bigger challenge. And dare I say, Mike, I was actually looking for a bit of stress.
Really?
Yeah.
So take us through that experience and what eventuated.
Well, so as I was having these thoughts to say, right, how do I really stretch and push myself? What should I be doing here? It's really, again, looking to step outside my comfort zone. And at the same time, I was recommended to another sales director who was looking for somebody. So this was at J&J, and J&J, the number one OTC, or J&J now Kenvue, the number one OTC organisation supplier, Australia, and a thriving pharmacy business, but really looking to sort of build, bolster, and become more structurally stable on the grocery side as well. So had a chat to the team there and decided to jump across and join J&J, now Kenvue. Started off running their Australian grocery arm, so and the field team that was associated with that. And then sort of over the time that I was there, it also sort of collapsed in the emerging channels in the export market as well. And again, I got my stress well and truly, absolutely, which is what I was looking for, and it just really stretched me.
Well, stress gives energy too, doesn't it?
Yeah, look, absolutely. And I think sort of looking back, what were the triggers? And I think having worked for an Anglo-Dutch company for 15 years, behaviours become predictable.
Yeah.
There's a corporate culture that sort of goes with it. So I was quite used to Unilever. Danone Nutricia, through that Daigao boom was crazy and chaotic anyway. But again, really seeing the French influence sort of come through in the behaviours and the structures, as we were transitioning from chaos to control. And this was me jumping in and I suppose my first exposure to an American multinational, and just getting used to how it behaved and structured themselves, and sort of, part of J&J, this huge medical organisation, and the consumer business was sort of the small corner of that organisation as well. So it was different behaviourally, but the skill set, the structures, what you're doing, selling products, building propositions, building brands through retailers, that was the constant.
Yeah. And this theme, Tom, of putting yourself into spaces that are a little bit more uncomfortable, and maybe to create that stress. And I know you said earlier on, stress isn't always bad. It's not. It's I think it gets a bad brand. Actually, it gives adrenaline. It gives accountability. It kind of puts you on edge. I think it helps you drive. Without it, you can coast very easily. So I think I like the way you use that word. J&J, a big American business, and your next step was to another enormous American business, the biggest almost, or one of the biggest for sure, but out of FMCG and into Microsoft. Why did you want to step out? Why Microsoft, and what did they see in this FMCG guy?
Yeah, it was kind of funny because I think it wasn't until my 4th interview with Microsoft that I decided I wanted to move. Before that, I wasn't sure. And I think my mindset very much was, I'm not leaving FMCG. So sort of let me rewind. The role that was being recruited was for the consumer sales organisation. So it was through, bricks and mortar and online retail in Australia, servicing consumer products. So if you think Surface computers, Windows PCs, at the time, Xbox. So they were consumer products through, JB Hi-Fi, Harvey Norman, Officeworks, EB Games, etc. So there's a lot of familiarity. So I didn't think of it as FMCG into technology. I thought of it as a different subset, a different channel, dealing with technology retailers, but still dealing with consumer goods, albeit with a slightly different purchase interval, 4 to 5 years. And instead of a couple of dollars, a couple of $100 to a couple of $1,000. So, I felt I had a skill set that could be applied, but also a lot to learn there as well. And how I ended up there is a former colleague of mine was just starting in the category team, and at the time they were recruiting for a sales director as well. And they asked him, do you know of any sales director that you think would be good and would be able to contribute? And the guy said, actually, I do know somebody. There's this guy I know named Tom. And so reached out to who would become my hiring manager, had a coffee, and we just had a chat. And what became, really clear is, Kimberly, who recruited me into Microsoft, she wanted somebody who could handle trade, the retailers, and sort of hold that C-suite engagement with the retailers, who could manage a team. And then what I suppose I learnt was quite unique is I was able to straddle both the sales side and the category side as well, which I thought was became very valued during my time at Microsoft.
And we'll get into the kind of similarities and differences, but there's a lesson there throughout your career of keeping your network. As you said, there's a lot of Unilever faces around the marketplace, but it works when you're actively engaged and maintaining those relationships and investing in them. They don't just happen. And that's what 3 or 4 times in your career where that's paved the way for something transformational for you.
But at the same time, keeping networks, I am hopeless. Like I am really, really bad. So, and kind of looking back, I could be more proactive in that. And I think for me, that's a learning for me to be more proactive along the way. I think, and I'll sort of explain why. While I'm in a role or working in a role, I develop very strong and close relationships with the people around me that I'm working with. Always, in every role. And in every role, I can sort of look back to say, look, there's 1 or 2 people where I really value their input. So, I'll be completely transparent and vulnerable to them on, hey, here's what I'm thinking, here's what I'm feeling, here's what I'm experiencing, what do you think? And sort of we do that. But then, if our paths sort of disconnect, I'm really bad at keeping in touch with people. But
they must remember you, Tom, because they keep calling you about jobs.
Well, what I find very valuable, and it's the same with my friendship groups. I could not speak to somebody for 2 or 3 years, but then we'll reconnect, and it's we're straight back in at that level. So I think that's I think for me, I gravitate to people who are genuine, transparent, and try to do the right thing, and I like to think I do the same, and I think that just makes those connections easier. Yeah. But networking, I am hopeless. Okay. Absolutely hopeless, Mike.
I'll rewind I still make the recommendation. Make sure you keep your networks active, people.
Absolutely.
Good. A lot of people in our audience are from an FMCG or consumer background. As we broaden our business as a recruiter, many of whom will look at Microsoft and know the brand. It's 100% recall, I'm sure, in the market, but look at it and go, wow, what is that like working in a business like Microsoft? So just give us your overview and maybe if you can make the kind of contrast to the more familiar world that a lot of listeners will be aware of, which is more of an FMCG slant.
Yeah, sure. I think firstly, it's an incredible organization. So with Microsoft, this behemoth, we're in a very, very clear consumer vertical where we sort of operated to the side, and, the consumer business in ANZ would report straight through to Asia and into the US. So, there's a consumer vertical there, and just an incredible bunch of people to work with, really challenging ideas, fantastic thinkers, and tremendous approach. To compare to FMCG, the principles are more or less the same. Price elasticity, promotional activity, negotiation, selling, construct, aggregating data to draw an insight, in that insight acting on it, and ultimately seeking to build brands through retail.
Okay.
FMCG, and certainly when I was there, it was like very much bricks and mortar with a little bit of online. During my time, accelerated through COVID and obviously dealing with technology, the bricks and mortar was still sizable, but a lot more focus on the online side through retail. So, a lot of similarities there. I suppose what is different is, as I said, big purchases, to buy a new Surface PC, could be anything from $2,000 to $3,000 to $4,000. The inner purchase cycle's 4 to 5 years. It's not 4 to 5 weeks. You're not managing thousands of distribution points. You're managing hundreds of distribution points, but the precision required behind it is incredible. And because you're dealing with technology as a differentiator, there's lots of confidentiality. Everything's under NDA. We were very much operating on a needs-to-know basis. And so, therefore, how we would engage with retailers was on a shorter timeline. And behaviourally, as a consequence of that kind of construct, instead of dealing with retailers on here's our 3-year brand or category strategy and how our brands fit into it, and here's our innovation cycle that we're thinking for the next 3 years, this is, right, here's what we're thinking and this is what we'll do in 6 months. And so structurally, I found Microsoft was incredibly centralised because of that confidentiality and dealing with incredible technology, Microsoft v. Apple and always that one-upmanship. So everything was deeply centralized and the markets were very much a cascade to that central plan. Whereas there's a bit more ability to create and navigate and put your own stamp on things in FMCG. Not to say that one's better than the other, it's just different.
Yeah.
And figuring out how to operate that. And I think, analytically, I'd probably, if I had to sort of hand out medals, I'd probably say, certainly in my FMCG experience, FMCG is probably a little bit better analytically. But when it comes to through retailer, through partner marketing, storytelling, grasping the big picture down to the micro detail, I'd probably give technology a bit more of a jump ahead of FMCG there. But I think the combination of the two and oscillating between those areas is a universal skill sets, just some's dialed up a little bit more than the other.
Now, really interesting compare and contrast. And culturally, the centralization piece you talked to, does that kind of flow through to that engagement, that cultural piece, how you contribute? It's such a large organization. Are you kind of in your bit, or do you feel you're part of this bigger culture?
Structurally, very, very tight swim lanes. Here's your decision making. Stick to that. So the ability to sort of jump across was more difficult. However, culturally, Microsoft is incredible and a fantastic bunch of teams. And certainly within the ANZ team, it's not a directive culture. It's a consensus culture. So here's what I'm thinking. Here's what do you think? Do you have any ideas to help build or sway this one? Whereas sometimes in FMCG, it's a bit more directive because you're managing a lot more mass, whether it's head count or SKU count or distribution points. So sort of I really had to tame down my directive nature and dial up my consensus or decision-making by consensus and a lot more socialisation of ideas. But then roles and responsibilities really tightly defined and I'd say more specialised by department.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Now, you've gone to a business like Microsoft from FMCG. FMCG is often quite a closed world and it's hard to break into. Could somebody from a Microsoft come to FMCG and make a difference? Would they have a role to play, do you think?
Absolutely. I think with the right curiosity, I think, and willingness to learn and to sort of roll up the sleeves to learn, absolutely. I think the trade engagement and storytelling, I think, for Microsoft is incredible. And the ability to sort of push through there is tremendous. The through retailer marketing and the sophistication there is light years ahead of certainly the companies I'd worked at previously were, it really is incredible. And I think the ability to jump up and down between big picture, longer term vision and sort of short term execution, absolutely, on the consumer technology side, jumping into FMCG, there would be some learning, particularly about the commercial side of it, probably a bit more upskilling, but they'd bring a lot more than what they'd need to learn.
Yeah. And you can see that going both ways from how you made the contrast compare piece earlier.
Yeah.
Someone from FMCG can go, as you did, go there and you're creating value in a way that they haven't got to the same extent, but you're learning as well, and then hence it can go the other way too.
Yeah, and I think a strong base piece of capability, so long as you can look at the world through a category lens, you've got strong financial and numerical acumen sort of below that as well, and you're curious enough to put the effort in to learn. I think they're the more important attributes, and what sector or organisation or channel or et cetera, that's more a secondary.
Yeah. We had Kurt Heggold on the podcast recently and asked him the same question around consumer electronics, and similar answer was said, yeah, absolutely. But you've got to be curious, and you've got to be humble enough to know what you don't know, and accept that actually there's some things that are brand new to you that you can learn a lot as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's not just I'm bringing this amazing skill set and the world's going to, make a path for me to be brilliant. That you can have impact, but you've got to learn as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think certainly what I've always found for me, and this is just for me, is jumping into the unknown or not necessarily knowing how to do something, so out of my comfort zone. That's certainly where I learn more by being more vulnerable.
Great. Yeah, guys, Kurt's the MD of Electrolux, I think episode 98 possibly. So if you're listening to this and wanted to jump back in, you flick back a few and you'll get to him. So
and this is that old Unilever network. I don't know Kurt, but two of my two first bosses, Sean Cassar, Phil Hine, they all sort of came out of the Unilever West Australian field office together with Kurt, and they always talk about him. And so I've kind of known his voice, and I caught up on that podcast as well. So.
Yeah, brilliant, fantastic. Moving on, we could talk all day, Tom, particularly if we go back to the question rugby, but we should get to the ends and in the interest of time. So I want to finish on a bit of advice as well. From a kind of a goal point of view, I'm interested because you set goals, but often you've had your career accelerated or changed by an intervention, it seems, by somebody saying, hey, here's an opportunity. Is from a career point of view, are you a goal setter, or is it about, being open to the opportunity when it comes?
I wouldn't say that I'm a formal, here's my 10-year plan that I break down into every, I'm definitely not that. I've got a fairly clear view as to where I want to go. And, I did this fantastic course when I was at Unilever. So this would have been about 2011, I think, where, here's how you do development plans. And I was like, actually, do you know what? I've got no idea. I was leading a team of 50 head off, 500 people in Vietnam. I don't know how to do a development plan because I'd always struggle to say, what's that first step? And it taught me the big thing that I took out of that course is forget the next role. It doesn't matter. And do you know what? Even the role after that, forget about it. But where do you reckon you want to be? 5 or 6 years' time, where do you reckon you want to be? And just anchor on that. It can change, but just for now, let's anchor on that one. And where are you now? Okay, and so therefore, what do you need to build? And all the guys who may be listening to this that have worked for me probably been getting this advice. It'll sound familiar to them. So this is what I follow. So I've sort of got a clear idea as to where I want to be in 5 years' time and sort of work toward that one. And I've always found, Mike, I think looking beyond the sectors and the brands that I've been working on, I've actually seen my career as sort of just adding onto itself and extending it a little bit further, as opposed to starting from complete scratch again. So I think when it comes to goal setting, I've got a pretty clear idea on what it is I want to be doing, but how I do it and who I do it with, I'm curious and I'm open-minded and curious enough to say, actually, before I say no, let me understand a little bit better or understand a little bit more. And I think that curiosity has sort of driven me or certainly navigated my career path.
I think that's really good advice, Tom. I think people get fixated on a job, and that's the unlock. That's the thing they want to do. That's the kind of the thing that's going to make them feel they're accomplishing all they want in their career. But sometimes you don't get that job, but it's okay. Yeah. Because there's lots of different steps and experiences and pathways that you can embrace and take to get you to where the longer term goal is. And that's one of the absolute key learnings from the podcast. But how do you cope? And what advice would you give when somebody thinks that job is what they want, they don't get it, and how do you deal with it if you've set your heart on something?
I think if there's something I was really chasing and I didn't get it, of course I'd be disappointed. But I think for me, I like to reflect on good and bad, just to say, right, if I had this moment again, what would I do differently? And I've done that on everything to do with work. And so, disappointment, sure, because, and that's an ego thing, right? I wanted it, I didn't get it. How do I respond to that? So then I think it's sort of moving beyond that to say, well, actually now let's go from emotion to reflection and really understand, well, what is it a decision went, a particular way versus where you wanted it to go? What was the driving force of that? So if it's a job, I really wanted this job and I didn't get it, well, what was it that they were looking for versus what you were presenting to them? And maybe the skill set wasn't quite or what they're looking for, you just didn't quite have it at that moment. So, in a case like that, fair enough, there was somebody better for that particular role or that particular task. So, if I can get to that point, that's okay. Or actually, do you know what? Even after that reflection, I still think I was right and a better candidate for that. Right? What did I not exhibit in order to do that? So I sort of bring it back to what can I control, how I respond and accept it, or what I can do next time differently and sort of hold myself accountable to learn from that.
That's, again, really good advice. Completely agree. Peace on ego. It leads to emotion. Try to rationalize it. Yeah. If the logic doesn't get to the right place, then there's still not a logical thought process to go through, which is, okay, well, what can I do differently? What didn't show up? And actually, working with a recruiter helps a lot. If guys, listeners, you're getting feedback on a role you didn't get, and the feedback is a bit vanilla, it's because the person giving the feedback is a little scared of how you respond. Lean in, ask them for the real reason, because there will be one, and they're probably uncertain to give you it, but the real reason is the learning. And it's probably something that you didn't do, or it's an experience you haven't yet got. There's a logical way of looking at it. Either you've got to get better at your storytelling, understand how to perform an interview, or there's just some stuff that you need to still do before you unlock the next level up. And it's fine, but just don't take bad, ordinary vanilla feedback as oh, I haven't got the right experience. Well, you saw that from my resume. So, lean in and ask for the real feedback. Yeah, and agree wholeheartedly. And I'll just add, and don't be defensive to try to argue why they made the wrong decision. Decisions made, move on. It's like sport, accept the referee's decision. Yeah. But then, okay, so your advice for me next time around, what could I or could have done differently, or what did I do that I shouldn't have done, et cetera, et cetera. Exactly. Great. Last question. What next for you, Tom? And as you were talking about earlier on, it's not necessarily a role, it's a longer term where you want to get to. Yeah. So what does that look like? Yeah, so I think for me, so I've just finished up with Microsoft. And so firstly, I'm taking a break. I'm going to enjoy summer. We're recording this in November, end of November, guys, if you're wondering, and you're listening to this and it's not summer. Yeah, well, so I'm going to enjoy my summer and just really looking forward to chilling out with the kids and, just go on little sort of family adventures in around Sydney. So really looking forward to that. And I think for me and sort of what I'm looking for and why I drove a change is, number one, I know I'm a team person. I'm not a consultant. I can't just work on my own. I need to be a part of a team. That's what gives me energy. And I feel like I'm at that stage in my career where it's not me taking from the team and learning to advance my own career. It's sort of me now going back to say, right, within my vertical, my team, how can I train individuals, upskill individuals, support individuals, and get the team harmony and the team dynamic working, number one. And then across leadership teams, so sort of with my marketing, finance colleagues, how as a leadership team can we steer the ship for the broader organisation? So for me, number one, that's absolutely critical.
for me. Number 2, I'm not a paint by numbers guy. Every role has some admin or it's got some tasks that you need to do. Fine. That has to happen. Every role's got it, no matter what level of the organisation you are. So I'm okay with that. But in addition to the sales execution side, I also like that strategy creation side. So, really, because, that's, I can think and tinker, I can go and execute and I can learn and I can feed that back into the planning cycle in a collaborative, teamwork type environment. So I'm really looking forward to that. And then finally, want to be out of the status quo. I want to be stretched and inspired, whether that's through, a fantastic boss or a great leadership team around me. Just bring that energy every day to push for more. That's what we did yesterday. How can we be even better today? And let's plan even further for tomorrow. So, really looking for something like that. I'm not talking industries or organizations, that's what I'm looking for. And so quite curious to explore, where that is on offer, because I think sort of combining those 3 things together is certainly what brings the best of me to a workplace.
Fantastic. Listeners, for what you've heard Tom talk about there is not this fixation with a particular job. It's about what you can bring and where you get your energy from and where you can learn and what you want to experience next. And it really just opens the horizons to, well, where might that be in terms of sectors, industries, and ultimately jobs. And it just widens your options. And I think too often we do get very fixated on, that's the job I want, that's the title I need, that's the salary I need. And as we've said twice in the last 5 minutes, try and drop that and look further to the horizon, and you will have a much more interesting experience in terms of career. Yeah. Wonderful. Tom, thank you very much.
Mike, thank you. I've enjoyed it. I was nervous as hell coming in, but I've really enjoyed the conversation. So thank you.
It didn't come across. It was a great, really enjoyable conversation. For those new to the pod and maybe even new to AXR as a recruitment specialist, we have over 100 episodes now for you to jump back into. Each one introducing you to another incredible leader like Tom, so many different career pathways, a lifetime of career inspiration. It's very tough to get advice and insights on how careers work. This pod gives you that in spades. So thanks again, Tom.
You're welcome.
And from me, Mike Dixon of AXR Recruitment and Search, thanks for listening. And we'll be back soon with more incredible leaders and insights to help guide your future in sales and marketing.
We hope you enjoyed today's podcast from AXR Recruitment and Search. We're passionate about helping you get the most out of your sales and marketing career. Keep listening as we bring you more career insights and advice from Australia's inspiring sales and marketing leaders. See you next time on Your Future in Sales and Marketing.